Good morning. I hope that you've been enjoying the long MLK weekend. I apologize for the delay given the holiday and everything else for getting this video up, but I wanted to take the time to talk about the third week, which gets us thinking about what listening is and what it means to communicate well one-on-one, to thinking about what it means to listen online and some of the steps that are necessary to be an effective online listener. Also, as a reminder, by this point in the quarter, you should have completed both the quizzes for weeks 1 and 2, as well as the weeks 1 and 2 activities. This week is a little bit different. You do have a quiz that covers the Crawford article that I'm asking you to read, but instead of a regular activity, I'm asking you to do a short writing assignment where you think about a conversation that you've had with somebody else, you summarize that conversation, and you think about your own styles and skills of listening. So please check that assignment on Canvas if you haven't done so already. With that being said, let's go ahead and talk about some of the new ideas that come up with this week. So this week is about understanding what it means to listen online, some of the ways that we can engage in listening spaces online, as well as some of the challenges that can come with listening and thinking about listening and what it means online. Oftentimes when we hear the word listening, we don't necessarily think about it as applying to online or digital spaces. But there's a lot of ways that listening does happen online that we can think about and explore in a little bit more detail. Also, you might notice that this week moving forward that we've transitioned from parts of a textbook to looking at different articles that address issues of listening and listening skills. So some of these articles I've tried to make pretty accessible and fairly easy to read. But if you find yourself working through an article for this class that's a little bit more challenging or maybe harder to follow, there are a few things that I think can help. One of the things to think about is the structure. So a lot of articles, including academic articles, are structured with an introduction that goes over the main ideas, a literature review that basically lays out the scene of previous research and work on the topic, the methods or approach that the current work is trying to do, the findings or insights that are offered here. For instance, Crawford is talking about the benefits of using listening skills online, and then a conclusion or summary of the main points. And that's generally a structure that you'll see through a lot of these kinds of articles. I also encourage you to find the most important ideas, right? What are those things that you are able to pick up on as the major thesis or points that are raised in the article? That can help a lot. And then you might also think about the questions or the remaining issues that you could bring to the table in things such as your weekly activities or discussions, right? Is thinking about what it is that excited or interested or confused you as you're working through these readings. This week's reading comes from Dr. Kate Crawford, who is talking about what it means to listen online. She's the co-founder of the AI Now Institute at NYU and also works with Microsoft Research. So she has both kind of an extensive and both professional and academic background in understanding and thinking about listening. And a lot of what she's focused on is how corporations, politicians, and people can use listening as an important skill to engage with one another online. Over these past couple of years with COVID-19, we've certainly seen a greater need to focus on understanding and making sense of online messages. So this is really important. So Crawford's thesis, her central point that she's trying to raise here, is that it's beneficial both for individuals, politicians, and corporations to think about listening and to use listening as a practice to make sense of things that happen online. That listening as a metaphor or a way of describing experiences online can be helpful for us in how to communicate better and to understand the world around us. And she argues that the way that we've talked about and thought about listening online is pretty limited. For instance, one common phrase that we can think about when we are reading or trying to make sense of messages online is the idea of lurking. Right? You can think about it as like a cat lying in wait if it spots a bird that it's trying to get, right? Lurking has this negative connotation that you're almost stalking or following or reading something without participating. Whereas something like speaking up, right, or engaging or being active or producing content is seen more positively online. And that's a bit of a problem, right? Because in a lot of online communities, for instance, things such as online channels such as Discord, or Twitter, or Facebook, right? A lot of online communities don't actually have a lot of participation from everybody. There's a lot of followers or listeners that are paying attention to the message. Lurking doesn't get at the idea that we are engaging when we're following messages online. And it also has this negative connotation, the idea that when we're listening online, we're not participating or engaging. So Crawford says, no, it's actually a useful and helpful skill to understand and listen to the messages that we hear online. As a part of this, Crawford lays out three major categories of online listeners. Individuals, people that are using online channels to talk to each other one-on-one, such as using like a direct message. Politicians, right, who use messages that are circulated online to make sense of meaning or the issues that they might choose to advocate for. And corporations that can choose to use messages online as a way to improve their communication and engagement with customers. There's also three different modes or ways that we can listen online. First is reciprocal listening. You can think about reciprocal or reciprocity as two-way, right? It's focused on listening to understand somebody else and their message, right? Reading their message, and then having the other person respond back. So reciprocal listening is definitely this two-way street of active communication. Background listening, on the other hand, is listening where you aren't paying super close attention and you're more focused on other tasks. It's listening that's not necessarily active. And then lastly, delegated listening is basically assigning other people to listen and focus on messages. So maybe it's delegating it to staffers or other workers like customer service specialists that are in charge of understanding the message. Listening, right, can be important because it can reframe how we engage and understand each other online. One example Crawford uses is the idea that we can think about a channel like Twitter, like a radio, where you're tuning in, where you're getting the frequency, where there's a lot of subtleties that you're trying to pick up on things such as retweets, the use of hashtags, the content of the message, the use of abbreviations, and slang, and so on. There's a lot of these different parts that are coming together to make the overarching message that you're trying to understand. Additionally, when we listen online at more of an individual level, again, this is generally going back and forth in a reciprocal way to try to understand and make sense of the message. You're not just reading, but you're reacting. You're maybe using an actual reaction like a thumbs up to understand the message and showing that type of feedback non-verbally. When it comes to politicians, right, many of us might feel frustrated that politicians don't necessarily listen to us, right? It can be difficult to feel like somebody is being listened to or heard by a political leader because oftentimes there's aides, staffers, people in charge of press, right, that are oftentimes the points of contact rather than the politicians themselves, oftentimes out of necessity. And that includes online settings where somebody, like a politician, poses a question and you know it's not them that's hearing the message. It's being filtered through other people. Genuine listening, right, can be exhausting. Town halls, for instance, a politician going to a physical setting and hearing the perspectives of people and their thoughts and responding to those is a really common strategy. But online, that's a lot harder. Maybe something like a virtual town hall event could be used, but it can be difficult to feel like a politician is really listening in an online setting because you don't know that it's them who's actually paying attention to the message. And again, there's the larger issue of a feeling of not necessarily being heard and understood that can make this especially more difficult online. Another idea here, right, is listening online through corporations, right? So corporations will oftentimes participate and hear different opinions that are shared. So for instance, people involved in customer support, right, will be able to hear out the perspectives, like if you're asked to complete a survey. Additionally, oftentimes corporations will provide rapid support through listening. In fact, a lot of corporations who post advertisements on social media will directly respond to comments using their official account. And then listening online is also a way that global awareness of how brand is used and discussed can be developed, right? If you're creating something such as a new candy bar, you want to see how people are using social media to talk about and use it, right? So if somebody is circulating, right, and there's a lot of TikToks about this candy bar and how much it tastes like sawdust, you want to know that because you want to get better and make a better product. So listening online for corporations can be a really helpful and useful practice. At the same time though, right, we know that this type of technology can bring about a lot of unique challenges too, including some expectations and constraints when it comes to participating online. For instance, right, the company Wendy's is famous for its Twitter handle, which oftentimes posts like roasts and making fun of other companies. So McDonald's clearly posted something, needs copy and link that didn't work, right? And Wendy's is making fun of them as an example of how corporations and a lot of groups are oftentimes being made fun of and criticized for not using technology in a way that's seen as especially effective. So there's a lot of unique expectations and obligations that many companies and groups feel in building good skills and competence online. So to wrap up, some of the major ideas and issues that came up from today. Listening, right, can happen online, as Crawford says. It's more than just lurking, it's more than just reading, but that listening is an active process that can help at both an individual, corporation, and political level. But that it also brings about challenges. Again, some of the ways to effectively listen and address technological barriers are things that we need to continue to think about. So I think these skills are useful in helping us to understand, now that we know what listening is, how it can be used in a lot of different settings and contexts to build good listening skills. So for next week, we'll be building on some of these ideas even further to discuss some of the ways that listening occurs professionally. So you'll have next week another activity and quiz to complete, and we'll go over some of those issues in a little bit more detail. That being said, I hope that you enjoy the rest of your week, and I look forward to talking to you again next week to go over these ideas in a little bit more detail.